What's going on, folks? What's going on? It's your boy, Andy Frantic, and we're back. It's the Smoke Breakdown Podcast, and yes, we are back. Just want to apologize for last week. I did want to release an episode last weekend. It was all ready to go. I had it recorded, and it just didn't happen, so I apologize for that. And yeah, I'm a little personally disappointed. I did want to try to keep to a weekly schedule, but, you know, life happens, things happen, and you just got to roll with the punches. So here we are this week, gonna try to keep it going. And, you know, I had a couple of things last week that I did want to talk about. You know, I ended up seeing Widows finally and was very impressed. Ended up inducting one Steve McQueen into the Ace of Spades Hall of Fame, and that will stand, even though the episode is kind of lost in the ether. That will still stand. I also ended up talking about how, you know, even as Canadians, we end up paying a lot of attention to what's going on south of the border. And, you know, sometimes I'm conflicted over whether or not it's even worth it. You know, it's south of the border. How much do we as Canadians have to pay attention to it? And, you know, I ended up looking at some Statistics Canada data that was recently released and found that, you know, even if we ignore Trump, we can't ignore the influence that he has on our society as Canadians. So, you know, it is still important that we do pay attention to what goes on down there. But yeah, fast forward to this weekend, it's a great example of how paying attention to stuff south of the border can take energy away from paying attention to stuff that's happening here, right here at home. And, you know, I think a couple of things that happened this week, especially with the Ontario government, you know, what I like to call the GOPC party, really highlights that sort of point, right? Like Doug Ford has done several things since he's been elected that have been troubling and that have mirrored kind of the approach that Trump and the GOP have taken south of the border. So that is something that we as Canadians should be concerned about, that we should be paying a lot of attention to and giving a lot of energy, or putting a lot of energy towards addressing, I guess, as citizens. I think first off, you can look at Toronto Council or Toronto City Council, which convened for the first time following the recent elections, in which Doug Ford was successful in getting legislation across that would essentially slash the size of council in half, down to 26 members. Of course, the argument that was put forth was that slashing the number of councillors in Toronto would help the municipal government run more smoothly and help streamline the process so they can get more stuff done. But we're already seeing, just after the first meetings, that at least initially, this isn't going to be the case. Instead of council getting right to work and trying to pass legislation that'll help the city and help Toronto, they first have to deal with how to change council so that it can work with just 26 members. Just for example, I mean, I saw this on CBC News. They were saying that there's 485 seats on various boards and various committees that need to be filled by these councillors. But with there only being 26, that means that each individual is going to be spread out so thin that the question as to how effective they can be becomes a legitimate one. And so that's where we find ourselves now with the council. And not only that, but the argument that slashing council would be, you know, more cost effective, even that's getting thrown out the window, with councillors having so much more on their plate and having so many more people under their responsibility. You know, they rightfully asked for bigger staffing budgets just to handle the increase in workload. Now we're seeing that overall the staffing budget is even greater than it was before with more councillors. So even that argument's out the window that this is going to be even more cost effective. But we'll see. I mean, I think this is a topic that is very complex and one that I continue to look into and continue to try to be more in tune with, especially being in Toronto. So we'll see how that goes. And even worse, we have Doug Ford appointing Ron Taverner as the new commissioner for the OPP. Ron Taverner happens to be a close family friend of the Fords. So this just screams of cronyism at the highest levels of the Ontario government. So I mentioned before how the PC party, what I call the GOPC party, used similar tactics to Trump and the GOP down south. And this is a perfect example of that. While Trump has, appointed his daughter and his son-in-law to high positions within the government, Here we also see Doug Ford appointing not necessarily family, but a family friend in much the same way. And not only that, but the way he so effortlessly dismisses any challenges or any questions of cronyism is quite astounding. And I feel like that right there is a challenge to us as citizens and to folks in the media. I feel like Doug Ford quipping that the media is the official opposition party, I feel like that is a challenge to us as citizens and to folks in the media. How much of this BS, essentially, how much of these, thinly veiled attacks are we going to take? Are we going to accept? We see it south of the border. Folks were willing to accept and to stomach so much that now, when we have foreign governments, assassinating members of the press, and Donald Trump and members of the GOP appear more than fine with it, that doesn't come across as the terrifying, alarming event that it is on a ubiquitous scale. You know what I mean? In certain pockets, certainly viewed those reactions with the level of concern that is warranted, but that response wasn't as ubiquitous as we would like it to be in a democracy. And I feel like when Ford is calling the media the opposition party or the media party, politicizing an entire pillar of democracy, we're headed down that same road. And I feel, appointing family friends to such high positions of power is heading down that road. I think we need to keep our eyes open. Let's see what happens and stay vigilant. Yeah, basically that goes back to, personally, I was spending so much time focused on what Trump was doing that I probably wasn't spending enough time focused on what Doug Ford was doing here in Ontario and here in Toronto. And it's not looking great. It's not looking great. Nevertheless, we're going to get into it. We got a couple of segments today again. We're going to go to a great breakdown. But first off, we have yet another inductee into the Ace of Spades Hall of Fame.
I'm blacker than the Ace of Spades and more militant than you and your whole damn army put together.
Well, I wish this was occurring under better circumstances, but nevertheless, this week we're inducting Cyntoia Brown into the Ace of Spades Hall of Fame.
Now can you dig it?
Now, whether or not you've heard of this young woman, I think it's important that we really go back through her life, because I think there's just so much context that needs to be laid out when it comes to this particular story. So, first off, Cyntoia Brown was born with fetal alcohol syndrome. So just picture that. Her mother had continued to drink throughout her pregnancy and then graduated to crack when Cyntoia was only 8 months old. She was eventually given up for adoption, but her new home provided its own set of challenges, to say the least. Cyntoia eventually ran away from her adoptive parents' house. She ended up staying with different people and unfortunately succumbed to substance abuse. It was during this time that she met a 24-year-old, charmingly referred to as Cutthroat, who turned out to be a pimp, and he eventually became abusive, forced her to use drugs, and forced her into prostitution. Abusive parents, abusive adoptive parents, abusive partners, and now at the age of only 16, suddenly a victim of sex trafficking. And then, on a fateful day in August of 2004, Cyntoia was picked up by a 43-year-old man. Once back at this man's place, she felt afraid for her life and killed him in self-defense, shooting him with her own firearm. But despite her age, she was tried as an adult and convicted of, among other things, first-degree murder, as the prosecution argued that, because she also took the man's wallet before fleeing the scene, the motive for the killing was not self-defense but robbery. And thus, Cyntoia Brown, a victim of child trafficking who had found the courage to defend herself, is now serving a life sentence and has been in prison ever since. Now, her case got a lot of needed exposure last year when Rihanna highlighted it on social media, and the cause was picked up in earnest by activists and celebrities alike, and has inspired several petitions. Her lawyer filed an appeal seeking to overturn her life sentence, citing a 2012 Supreme Court ruling which deemed sentencing a minor to life in prison as unconstitutional. However, earlier this week, the Tennessee Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, ruled that Cyntoia Brown like any other defendant with a life sentence, must serve at least 51 years in prison before she's eligible for release. Now, the case is still pending judgment by the Sixth Circuit, so all is not lost. But I just can't imagine what this woman has had to deal with throughout her life. Cyntoia Brown, you're our newest inductee to the Ace of Spades Hall of Fame. And folks, please get on your Googles and sign as many petitions as you can. Let's do what we can to help this woman out. Real talk. Real talk.
Dynamite! Dynamite!
We'll be right back with the breakdown. But first, I want to let you know about our website, afrodismal.com. Go check it out. We got our blog up there. Obviously, all our past episodes of the podcast. We got some music as well, and we got some videos. Feel free to check it out and follow us on social media at afrodismal on Twitter. And yeah, let us know what you think using the hashtag SBDpod.
Now it's time for a breakdown.
This week, we are breaking down the new teaser trailer for Avengers Endgame. Woo! Let's go! I am so hype over this movie. I can't describe it. I can't put it into words how hype I am about this film. Now, first off, let's get the elephant in the room out the way. Outside of the name of the movie, this trailer revealed nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that's okay. We still have a whole other movie in Captain Marvel that we need to see before we get to Endgame. And hey, maybe even a second one in Into the Spider-Verse, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse as well. You know, I'm just saying, but we're going to get into it. Let's go. So first off, I just want to say that I love the fact that this movie is slated to be 3 hours long. I am so ready. Let's go. Okay, so it looks like going up against Thanos will be the original team in Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Bruce Banner, Black Widow, and Clint Barton, who's back as the anti-hero Ronin, probably because the snap turned his family into dust. That's my theory, and that's been a fairly popular theory online. Alongside them, we have Ant-Man, War Machine, Okoye, Shuri, Valkyrie, perhaps Meek and Korg. We have Wong, Rocket and Nebula, and maybe the Vision. And of course, Captain Marvel. Man, there is a lot going on there, but I like it. I think the closest thing to a reveal that the trailer offered us was probably the last scene, which showed Scott Lang, the Ant-Man, arriving at the Avengers headquarters in a brown van. And that's because the last time we saw that van was in the credits scene of Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, here's why I believe this constitutes a reveal, and it has to do with how Marvel Studios has started to structure their films recently, especially recently. They've largely allowed movies to be self-contained, choosing to rather forward the larger MCU plot or the larger MCU narrative only through credits and post-credit scenes. For example, in Thor Ragnarok, the whole film, again, self-contained. It was just Sakaar, it was just Asgard. But in the credits scene, that's when they run into Thanos' ship. Again, that's part of the larger narrative. Black Panther, same thing. Movie's very self-contained, but in the credits scene, we check in on Bucky Barnes, the White Wolf. Again, part of the larger MCU narrative. So, what happens in Ant-Man and the Wasp credit scene? Well, we find out that this brown van houses the entirety of Hank Pym's lab, including his quantum tunnel, which is the gateway into the quantum realm. While Scott Lang is preparing to use said tunnel, Janet Van Dyne, the original Wasp, warns him not to get, quote, sucked into a time vortex, unquote. Ant-Man is subsequently stranded in the quantum realm as his entire team gets dusted by the Thanos finger snap. Again, this is the credits scene, the portion of the film that builds upon the larger MCU narrative. These words were used for a reason. Time travel, in some way, shape, or form, will be involved. We've already been introduced to the concept in the MCU with Doctor Strange and the Eye of Agamotto. But more than anything, there has to be some scenario that gets Captain Marvel from the 90s to the present without her aging, apparently. So I guess one of my theories is that we'll see Ant-Man show up in the Captain Marvel movie. That's one of my theories. One of my lesser theories has to do with those that didn't make it. Namely, what happened to them? What if they're not dead, but were rather transported to different universes? Which is why I mentioned the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie. We already know that the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man is in it. And I'm willing to bet that there's a chance that we're gonna see the Tom Holland Spider-Man in it as well. This is a Marvel movie that gets into the multiverse theory. That's kind of like what the plot hinges on. So I can't imagine that the MCU, the main Marvel universe, doesn't get represented in it in some way, shape, or form. So that's my lesser theory, that Tom Holland Spider-Man shows up in the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie. I'm not banking on it as much as my first theory, but I'm still putting it out there. Keep in mind that Marvel has been aggressively looking to purchase back all of their properties, whether it's Fantastic Four, you have Venom as well, and the X-Men as well. So that further suggests that the multiverse may be something that they're going to be looking into in the future. More than anything, though, I truly believe that as much of this movie will be the conclusion for what I call the Infinity Stone saga, it'll also be the beginning of a new saga, one that will at the very least begin with Secret Invasion. Now, for those that don't know, Secret Invasion was an event storyline penned by the venerable Brian Michael Bendis back in 2008. In it, it was revealed that the Skrulls, a race of alien shapeshifters that we'll get deeply acquainted with in the Captain Marvel movie, had exacted a long-term infiltration plan, secretly replacing superheroes with alien imposters. Basically, if a superhero had died and mysteriously come back from the dead, chances are that the hero that came back was actually a Skrull imposter. So my guess is that in Avengers Endgame, in the final battle with Thanos, a superhero will pass away and reveal themselves to have been a Skrull this whole time. So the question that I have for you, dear listeners, is, who will that be? Who among the Avengers and the Guardians and all of the heroes, who among them are actually Skrulls in disguise? And I've been racking my brain about this for quite a while, thinking of the characters that have died and come back to life, heroes we lost track of at some point in time, ones that disappeared and came back after a couple of years. And it's almost as if there's too many candidates at this point. I mean, for example, the Hulk disappeared for 2 years. The next time we see him, all of a sudden he can talk? I mean, that's kind of odd. Also, do yourself a favor and go back and watch the conclusion to the Battle of New York in Avengers 1. When Stark goes through the portal with a nuke, we lose track of him for a significant moment. And then there's this weird like womp sound right before he reappears. You know? Scratching chin emoji for sure. And I'll be honest, like personally, I think those are my two biggest bets. I think Bruce Banner and Tony Stark may be Skrulls at this point. But I'll end with this. One thing that I'd love to see in Avengers Endgame is Shuri take up the mantle of the Black Panther in T'Challa's absence. Marvel, help a brother out. Please make this happen. That's all we got for this week, folks. Thanks for tuning in once again. I apologize for not being up last week. But we're back, and we're going to try to keep doing this on a weekly basis. But yeah, hit us up at AfroDismal on Twitter. Visit our website, afrodismal.com, and let us know, what do you guys think about the Secret Invasion theory? What do you think about the time travel theory, maybe seeing Ant-Man in the Captain Marvel film? And what do you think about the multiverse theory? Maybe Tom Holland shows up in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Let me know what you think. Love talking about the MCU movies. I'm a huge fan. And yeah, we'll be back next week. And as I always say, it's all about progress, not perfection. Hope you all have a good week. Cheers.